Live from Denver's Cherry Creek neighborhood, you are watching the Kyle Malnati Show on YouTube. This is where Multifamily Matters. I'm here with my guest, Daria Castiglione, and Daria and I are excited to see you today on our show. Daria, welcome. Thank you for being on the show.
I'm delighted to be here.
Well, Daria owns 78 apartment units across the state of Colorado, most of which are here in Denver, but she also owns some properties in Pueblo. And Daria, the first question that we have for all of our guests is, how did you get your start? What's your story, and how did you start investing in multifamily real estate?
I started at the end of the 80s. I started at the end of the 80s when I came to Denver, and the economy was really, it was terrible. They were in a depression. The bottom had fallen out of three, Dallas, Denver, and Anchorage. And at the time, it was really bad.
Yeah,
it was
Denver
really bad.
Was not at all diversified. When we were a big
That's
economy
correct.
based on oil and gas production, and so Denver really, I mean, they called it a see-through city because there were all these new office buildings that had been built, and all of a sudden they're all vacant. So Denver was really going through some tough times. So you started in the 80s, and what brought you here?
I came for an internship. I came for an internship with the National Conference of State Legislatures because I was going through my master's program in public administration. I completely fell in love with Denver. Completely fell in love with it.
It's an awesome city.
But one out of every three properties was either vacant or in foreclosure. People had sometimes just left the keys on the counter and walked away. The HUD circulars for foreclosures was half an inch thick, and it was published twice a week.
Oh my gosh.
Like 1988, 89, 90.
And in
91.
hindsight, that was a perfect time to be investing in real estate, because from the late 80s to 92, you had what was called the Resolution Trust Corporation, or the RTC, where they would bundle up all of these foreclosed assets and sell them at incredible discounts. And some of the best deals that I see are when people bought in the early 90s. So that's great.
Exactly.
So our next question, Daria, for the folks here on our show is, what do you do differently than most other real estate owners? What's your competitive advantage?
I offer a good quality vintage housing, no frills, because the buildings didn't really come with frills, for a reasonable price. And because my properties are vintage and they don't have a lot of amenities, you will not find a dog pooch, washing station,
right.
Okay, or go smart car at one of my properties. Sorry, but I do have on-site management. We try to have a 24-hour turnaround for repairs.
That's really important. From a customer experience standpoint, you can have rooftop decks and dog washing stations and bike racks and Wi-Fi throughout and all this other stuff. But if someone doesn't fix your leaky faucet that's driving you nuts when you're trying to go to sleep, I mean, that's the important stuff. That's the real in the trenches type of stuff. So you have explained to me when we were prepping for the show that you've got a way of training your team to really decentralize some of those decisions so that they know where their area of responsibility is, so that they can make quick decisions and make decisions that are very tenant focused and very client focused.
Precisely, because that's all we can offer in a vintage building.
Sure.
Is good old-fashioned customer service.
What are the factors that you've believed have contributed to your success in real estate?
Perseverance, never giving up. Talking to as many people as I possibly could to get new ideas and to glean information and knowledge. But pretty much, I would say in my case, perseverance. Because when I bought my properties, all I could afford when I was starting out were actually crack houses. The buildings that no one else wanted. Yeah, that's what I could afford.
Yeah,
and they were operating crack houses.
Yeah.
I had to kick out the crackheads and the drug dealers.
Scary, scary stuff for at the time a young woman, I'm sure. But you're a tough lady, and I think you learn how to really manage people, whether it's managing folks that you work with on your team or managing tenants. And real estate, I mean, it feels like it's this kind of harder, archaic business with just structures and buildings, but these buildings have life. And the life is the people that live in them. And so I think perseverance and determination are absolutely key if you're going to manage your own properties. A question that came from the audience, it's actually a client of mine named Mary. Mary's question is, when does it make sense for an owner-operator, or your weekend warrior that's doing things on their own while they still have a day job, when does it make sense for them to hire their first assistant or employee? And then also, what are your expectations of that employee when you made your first hire?
Okay. I would say it depends on, in part, how many units and the age of the units and how often you need to do, let's say, maintenance, or you have vacancies. So if you're finding in a vintage building, as vintage buildings get older, they clearly need more maintenance.
Right.
They just do. And so it can eat you alive as an owner-operator. So there are times when you make a decision like, I'd like a little bit more of a life than spending all my free time, okay, trying to coordinate schedules with my tenants so I can get in and,
right.
and you know, replace that flush valve in the
and
toilet.
That's the case in any business. You know?
Always.
You basically bought a job until you hired your first employee.
That's right. So wouldn't it be nice, maybe if I had an on-site manager?
Right.
And maybe I had negotiated with this on-site manager to also take care of, like they're housed in this one building, but you know, their part of the responsibility would be to take care of these others. Or develop a core group of about 4 or 5 maintenance people for different purposes or the same, and so you always have a backup in triplicate, and then you can, and you've already pre-arranged the costs involved and how they're going to handle materials and things like that. I give my apartment manager, my main apartment manager, a credit card.
That way that they can go in and purchase things without having to come constantly and get it from you. Yeah.
It makes the workflow so much easier. There's less holdups.
Yeah. So when we were prepping for the show, you had talked about, especially when leasing apartments.
Yes.
And obviously fair housing is a big subject in our world, but when leasing apartments, you have kind of a checklist that you've got your leasing personnel that they can go through before they expedite the lease transaction up to you or float that up to you. So do you mind unpacking that real quick and just kind of going over some of the things that you absolutely need to see before you can make that business decision on the lease?
Whenever I have my people, when they lease, they have to follow a certain protocol. And the protocol involves filling out a credit application. They hand out a sheet for each of the apartments. It has all the information on it, for not just for contact, but here is the security deposit, here is the rent, here are the amenities that come with this unit, all of that. And at that point, in particular, this one apartment manager where I have my most turnover, he knows that he has to get all of this information, very key specific information, and double check it on the credit app. That comes back to me, and then I run it through a credit application place.
So he's spending a ton of time vetting out these tenants, making sure that they're good people, because you want to create a community of good, wholesome folks that really connect with each other. You know, they may not be best friends every day, but you know, good, safe, affordable living in downtown Denver. And so I think that's important to empower the employee to say, you need to make sure you have all these things taken care of before the decision becomes part of it.
And he qualifies them based on income, because I've crunched my numbers on all of my buildings, so I know.
You're talking about ratios.
That's right, there are ratios, because I have gross leases in a lot of my buildings. The tenant has to qualify between 45 and not exceed 50% of their net income every month can be applied to rent. And because of fair housing, I stick to those.
Right.
If you were at 50.5 or 51%,
it doesn't work.
I can't rent you an apartment, you just can't afford it. You'd be house poor.
Yeah, and on that, with the gross lease, you know, that's going to also include utilities. So that ratio may seem kind of high. Usually we hear about 30 to 35%, but when you're including utilities on top, that's where that accelerates.
That's right.
So again, thank you, Mary, for the question on our Facebook page for Madison Commercial. The next question I have for you is, what are the things that you do differently than most other real estate owners?
Oh my. I have a lot of, I've figured out a process that works for me. So I have a lot of planning. Like I said, we're very focused on service, because that's what we can offer.
Right.
We have rules and regulations that we make every tenant sign off on. So we have high expectations of our tenants, actually. And we do expect them to follow the rules so that we can all live in peace together.
Yeah. And those systems, I think, if you're a small business owner, you are basically going to be stunted to your level of growth until you can create a system that then allows you to continue to grow. And so those systems are very important. And then allowing your employees the room, the latitude to actually work within that area, that empowerment that you give them to say, here are the rules, here's the situation, and then you can help make the decision all the way up until the final lease signing.
And you involve your tenants in that system too.
Right.
So I tell my tenants, and much as does my manager, it is your obligation to tell me if something is wrong in your apartment. After all, you're living there. If that proverbial faucet or tub is leaking, I insist that you tell us so we can come in and fix it. It's just a washer.
Right.
All right?
Yeah.
Before the sound drives you crazy. And then it's hot water gushing.
Right.
So we actually right from the start, when people are signing their lease and we're going through the rules and regulations, we are in actually a process of training, indoctrinating our tenants, and telling them these are the expectations we expect from you.
Right. High expectations, but you get a high quality of living in a very charming building, and it is amazing when we do property inspections. The biggest things that you see are leaky faucets and carbon monoxide or smoke alarms that have been taken off the wall.
Right.
And the owner goes, why didn't you tell me this? And they're like, well, I didn't want to bother you. And so I think it's so smart that you do that. The next question I have is, I believe that leaders are readers. What book have you read that really was one of those special books?
The Monk and the Riddle by Randy Komisar.
Okay. The Monk and the Riddle by Randy Komisar with Kent Lineback. And why did you like that book?
It's transformative. I like books that not only make me think, but actually cause me to have a paradigm shift in my thinking. And this was one of those books. It's quite an amazing.
Well, I have to put it on my reading list.
You should. And then you're gonna have to come back and tell me
I will.
if it was as transformative for you as it was for me.
No, but that's cool, because you read some books and you're like, oh, that was interesting, that was nice, but then there's some where you're like, that's a book I'm going to read 5 or 10 times over, and that changed the way that I think about things. And finally, Daria, thank you for your time today. What advice would you give to aspiring investors when they're looking at buying their first rental property?
Perseverance, and regarding money and time and budget, you're going to have to use Murphy's Law and multiply it by 3. So if you think it's going to take a month to renovate this building, multiply it by 3, it'll probably take up to 3 months. There's always hidden damage that you can't anticipate. And so in turn, when it comes to your budget, if you think it's going to take X amount of dollars, apply the Murphy's Law times 3, and then multiply it again by another 3. Again, hidden damage can eat you alive. But that is why, if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to get into this kind of a business, it's all about perseverance. It doesn't matter if you're like the first, or it doesn't matter if you're first or last. It just matters that you ran the race and you get to the finish line. That's really and truly all that ever matters. You have to have perseverance. It can be an amazing business. It can be a tough business. But it's all about your willingness to hang in there and just to hang in there.
And really go for it.
And you have to go for it. You have to go for it.
Well, I appreciate your time here on the show. I have a special gift for you. Like I said, I believe that readers are leaders, and this is a book by Jim Collins from Boulder, Colorado. And this is a special book. I actually got it the other day at a silent auction for a local charity called Youth Roots that's based in Denver. They're right at 11th and Sherman, and this is actually an autographed copy of Good to Great. I read this book earlier this year, and I absolutely loved it. I don't know if you've read it or not, but I absolutely love Jim Collins' works.
Thank you. I do too. I haven't read this
one. Oh, you haven't? Oh, that's perfect. We didn't plan this, guys. Well, that's great. Thank you so much for watching the Kyle Malnati Show, where Multifamily Matters. With Daria Castiglione, we would love to say thank you to Stuart Title for providing us the space, and we'll see you around the neighborhood.